How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Um, Thank you for agreeing to sit down with me and have a casual conversation. But before we dive into the conversation, I know you're hungry and I'm hungry as
I'm
well.
I'm pretty hungry. Yeah. The only thing I ate today was clam chowder, and that was in San Francisco this morning. So that was like, okay. So what time is it right now? It's 8:06 here. That was like 6, maybe 7 this morning.
Mm.
So
So I don't want to stop you.
it's like it's been like a good like 9 hours since I've last eaten.
Yeah.
I also ordered a salad, but like it was kind of weird because like it had no dressing on it.
Hmm.
And I like tasted one of the apples that was in it, and it tastes like Dawn soap.
Hmm.
I don't know what that was about, but
Well, you're about to have some good sushimi.
yeah. Thanks for getting dinner, by the way.
No, my pleasure. So, you know what? Food always tastes really good when you're hungry. You could put like some garbage in front of me. I'd be like, this is wonderful. um, yeah, it's been quite a while. It's been, I want to say like 8 hours or so for me. Yeah.
Mm.
But once again, thank you for coming to Nashville and sitting down with me.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. For people who may not be familiar with you, if you want to just give like a brief introduction about yourself.
There's bones in my eel.
They,
Getting in the way of my introduction here.
I didn't realize that they would leave bones in there.
Never had that issue before.
Mm.
Extra calcium, I guess. But I'm Chloe Cole, and I am. What would I call myself? I guess you could say that I am a detransitioned activist. I'm from the Central Valley of California, and I speak mainly on the issue of gender transition.
Mm-hmm.
I went through the process of going through gender transition while I was a child. So between the ages of 12 to 16, I was identifying as a boy. At 13 was when I started the medical process with Lupron to suppress my puberty, testosterone to masculinize my body. And at 15 years old, I underwent a double mastectomy, which was the removal of my breasts. And when I was 16 years old, I realized that I wanted to have children one day, and that I still very much was a feminine woman. But I had some trauma that was unresolved. I was afraid to be a woman, of the responsibility that would come with that. But in the end, that was what I wanted to be, and it was the only thing that I could be. And so I stopped transitioning, and I've been speaking out about my experience of having gone through that as a kid, and against the use of these treatments in children, and for the rights of parents to raise their children to be healthy, fully functional adults, and to be informed by doctors, by parents.
Okay. I mean, that's some introduction actually, because you went through a lot. So I like to think about like from the child's perspective. Were your parents aware of how you were feeling and what was going on?
Not entirely. So growing up, I would say that I had a healthy relationship with my mom and dad, pretty much. They were both in the picture, and I mean, I was raised in a loving household, but I also I wasn't super close to them. I never really confided in them with like my personal feelings or like whatever was going on in my life a whole lot. Just because I didn't really know how to express those feelings to them, or just in general. Like it was hard for me at those ages to kind of articulate that. But I mean, I had some issues going on at school from a young age with socializing, and also like I had an IEP plan in place, like a special plan in place for my education that my teachers and school staff were supposed to abide by, because I was diagnosed with ADHD. I don't think that is correct now. I think that I might actually be on the spectrum, and I hear the same thing from a lot of my close family and close friends. But my mom and dad were not really getting any help from either my teachers or my doctors with really dealing with these issues that I had. So when I came to my mom and dad telling them that I was experiencing these feelings around my body, they kind of figured that it had to do with my difficulties in school, especially with socializing with other kids and getting along with them, making and maintaining friendships, being a tomboy, and also just the awkwardness of me kind of going through a bit of an early puberty. So they're very sensible about it, but they didn't know that I was getting these ideas from the internet. I had pretty much unrestricted internet access, and they didn't really know what I was seeing on there. But I learned about this through social media, and they had no idea about the content that I was being exposed to.
Do you feel, I mean, I think I kind of know the answer, but do you feel if your parents were better educated about this type of stuff, that they would have been more prepared to prevent it from happening?
Yeah, I mean, at the time, there weren't really any real resources for parents beyond things that were just strictly affirmative.
Right.
Like, there were like these so-called like parent support groups, right? But it was always presented in a very positive light. It was always about the child, what the child wanted, rather than what they need, obviously, because children don't need to go through gender transitions.
Right.
And like the parents would never really talk about the hardships of going through this or about the other side of things. And my dad once told me, actually, that he never would have allowed me to go through this if he knew a single case of somebody detransitioning, especially another kid. He never would have allowed this to happen. But at the time, these parent-oriented resources and the doctors weren't even talking about the possibility of desistance or detransition or regret. It was always in the affirmative. It was always give your child what you want, or if you push back, we'll basically threaten you with the suicide of your child. They were told that there was another choice, that this was an innate part of me, that this was my identity, that it wasn't just a phase, that I needed it now. And they were like citing the suicide rates when my mom and dad were pushing back, saying like this number of people who are transgender experience suicidal ideation or attempt suicide or complete suicide. And so they attribute that to not having proper support, which means just like giving entirely into the wants of the patient, of the child, or not being transitioned medically.
Right.
But I could have been perfectly fine if it weren't for these treatments. I wasn't suicidal until I started on them.
Oh, wow. Well, shit.
I was far from it. Like, I was kind of in a rough situation. Like I was going to my 8th grade year, and I had friends who were all older, so they'd already gone off to high school and such, and I was kind of having a difficult time, like getting along with my peers in my grade level, and I was kind of awkward looking at the time. I was trying to present myself as a boy, but I didn't actually look like one because I wasn't one, and I wasn't on the interventions yet.
Right.
So people kind of just like took it as like an opportunity to kind of pick on me.
Right.
And I didn't really feel like I had a whole lot of places to turn, other than the internet, which I got in trouble for something. I can't remember what exactly it was, but I had my devices taken for a while. So just like, I felt like I was going to school, not doing much other than like going to school and playing video games and drawing, but like not really having any real human connection with the people around me. I didn't really feel like I had anybody to confide in.
Right.
And going to therapy actually worsened those feelings for me, because it was like, okay, like I'm going to therapy, but they're not actually addressing these real problems in my life. They're going along with calling me a boy, and I should be happier, right? I should be getting better, but nothing is happening.
Mm-hmm.
But I was far from wanting to die. I absolutely wanted to live. I wanted to be
Improve your
happy.
life.
I wanted to improve my life. And it just
Yeah.
felt like everywhere I turned, that wasn't happening. And so I started becoming more and more distressed. And I felt like that's because nothing was working. That was a big part of what made me feel like I wanted to go further into my transition. I felt like, well, because I'm being picked on for not quite looking like a boy, for looking different, I should go further into this. I should start treatments so that I'll be taken seriously. Maybe I'll be taken more seriously if people see me as a
Right.
real boy.
That makes sense to me. Like, and some transparency. Like, I struggled with depression as a kid, and even into my adult years, and suicidality as well. And when you become older and you look back, like, why did I feel this way? Sometimes it's kind of like, oh, but that problem was so small, right? That, but when you go back to being a kid, like, this is your entire world.
It's all
So
you know.
it's all you know. And so when your world is, you go home or you go to school, and then you go to school and it sucks, and you're just barely holding on in a sucky environment, which you spend a lot of time at, right? And you come home, and home is okay, but you have to constantly go to this sucky environment. And then something happens and it becomes even worse, right? Maybe some sort of event happens,
Yeah.
and it becomes even more detrimental. And now you're, I don't know, let's say 8th grade, and you still have years to go of this. It feels like such a mountain to climb, um, and you don't feel like things will ever get better. It's very easy to fall down that path. But
Yeah, and transitioning was like one of my last hopes, really.
yeah,
And for a while, especially like once I started testosterone, I felt great, and I started going through like the social changes and being accepted amongst my peer groups as a boy. I thought it was making me better, and that like that temporary euphoria, that honeymoon period, really was what made it hard for me to realize that it was actually destroying me.
I've heard that there are
That was a bad idea, just kind of going everywhere.
it's just going over. um, I've heard that there's a testosterone euphoria that sometimes the transitioners feel. I don't know.
Yeah, you could say that. I mean, it's like this instant boost to your mood and your sex drive and your confidence and everything. It's just it's pretty. It feels pretty crazy.
Yeah.
It's not like male puberty, like actual male puberty, where you're like gradually having an increase in those hormone levels over time. It's just like a sudden spike in a single day, in a single week.
Yeah, I can imagine that's like.
And I was also having my puberty suppressed, and that sucks. That went on for like a month or a few months, and I was already a few years into puberty at that point in time. Like I was about a year post like starting periods. So suppressing my hormones like that completely basically put me into a menopausal state at the age of at the age of 13. So like I was going through, I was experiencing like physical side effects, right? Like hot flashes. Like which I would best describe as like these uncomfortable waves of heat just like moving through your body, through your limbs. And for me, it was accompanied by like these other sensations of like tingling and itching, like all over my body, and sometimes like even like little like burning sensations like in my fingers, for example. It sucks, and it made me very lethargic and kind of tired and kind of apathetic in my day to day. So starting on a literal steroid after a few months of that was amazing.
Right.
And I was given this belief that this treatment was a part of my identity. and that I was going to become my real self
Right.
as the man I thought I always was supposed to be. So that in itself was a pretty exciting idea for me.
I think, especially with everything that happened with COVID, it made a lot of people question the institutions.
Mm,
Um, they're questioning the educational system. They're questioning the doctors who lied to them about COVID.
mm,
Um, the all the experts, the people who have all these degrees and went to Ivy League schools, and they're supposed to know what's going on, yet they didn't know, or they outright lied,
yep.
and it made a lot of people distrust a lot of institutions that we kind of had a healthy amount of trust in, right? I would say. And so obviously, like, there's always a phrase like you should get a second opinion,
Mm,
right? Because yeah, he's a doctor, but he's a human being. He might make a mistake. So you go see somebody else to get a second opinion. But what if it feels like the entire system is corrupt, right? And it feels like everything is flawed. Let's say you just had a bad therapist, right? And they said go to a doctor, but then maybe the odds are when you find a doctor who'd be like, I don't know about this. I don't feel comfortable with moving forward with this. But it just feels like that roadblock that would make you like question your decision
yeah.
or make your parents question what they're doing.
Yeah.
It just got removed and just come on through. And
Yeah, I mean, I
yeah,
went through several therapists over the years,
yeah,
and none of them were addressing my real core issues in my life. And I just kept getting worse and worse over time. They started addressing it with medication or talk therapy. None of it was working.
yeah.
It felt just so utterly hopeless.
Now, I know you said you went to multiple, but were they all telling you the same? Were they all affirming?
I mean, they all had to be.
Okay.
They really all had to be. Otherwise, I mean, in California, you're basically required by law to affirm this. Because gender identity and transition is included in its ban of conversion therapy. So like anything other
Mm.
than being the affirmative with this could be considered trying to convert somebody out of their transgender identity, and people could like lose their licenses over that.
Has that actually happened though?
Um, I can't recall any cases, but even like in the healthcare system, like with my healthcare provider, all the therapists are trained to affirm a patient who is transgender if they have one,
Hmm.
and always refer to them with the preferred names, pronouns, to never question it at all. And that was all that I really needed, just somebody to push back a little bit, to say no as the adult, and just to look at me,
Yeah.
to look at the picture of my life. If they had just gone for like a more holistic course of treatment, if they had just been sensible, this all could have been prevented.
Right.
Wasabi straight into the sinuses.
Yeah, Nashville's known for its pollen and stuff like that. So, yeah.
Oh no, it was the wasabi.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, I'm also like I've been like sneezing it up in here.
Yeah, when I lived here, I guess it's 19 years ago. It feels weird saying that. Jesus. Um, that's when I developed allergy issues, and it wasn't until like a year after I moved back home that uh, the allergy issues finally like cleared up. Maybe it was
Mm.
like 2 years, because I would have to take Claritin and stuff like that every
Yeah,
so often. But it's because the pollen is just like over here. They even have like pollen warnings.
really,
Yeah,
it's that bad.
it's that bad. In certain times of the year, like you can see it.
Really.
Yeah, I did a drive from. I was driving from New Jersey to Tennessee, and I remember getting relatively close. I was in Central Tennessee, just driving on the highway, and I had the windows open, and I remember my eyes just covered, like just watered to the point where I couldn't. I was like not being able to see. It was just like that, and I had to roll up the windows and put the AC on for it to like. Oh my god, I almost couldn't see driving. Like that's how crazy it is in this area when it comes to pollen.
I got allergies like crazy. I can't
Yeah.
imagine living here. Yeah, you know what's kind of weird is that like when I went on testosterone, my allergies and some of my other like immune issues like eczema kind of lessened for a little bit,
Mhm.
and then once I went off of it, it got worse again. Like my eczema started popping up again. It's kind of like spread to like different areas of my body, and weirdly enough, and I don't know if this is like due to the testosterone usage and how that might have affected my immune system, or if it's just my body being weird. But in the middle of my adolescence, I developed a banana allergy, which sucks, because like bananas are in everything. They're like
Right.
they're in every dessert.
I was gonna
They're good. They're like in every good dessert. They're in like crepes and stuff.
Right.
But you know, like for lunch every day at school, I would have a banana every day. And I would attribute the stomach ache that I would get just like the chocolate milk. I was like, oh, maybe like I'm just like getting older and I'm like really lactose intolerant now or something. But so the day that I finally figured it out was when I was like sometime during my sophomore year. And I was just like rushing out the door because I didn't really have much time, and all I could manage to bring with me for breakfast was like this. It was a banana, and it was a pretty decently sized one.
Yeah.
And I ate the whole thing before the bus ride to school was over, and I was like, I'm getting these gnarly stomach aches, dude. Like it feels like I'm getting stabbed in the stomach. Like I'm on fire at once. And it wasn't until I got there that I was like, crap. I'm having an allergic reaction. Like, what do I do? So I'm like telling my teachers, I'm like calling home. So my dad picks me right back up, drives me home, gives me a single tablet of Benadryl, and I had this weird dream after the Benadryl knocked me out. So this was like during early 2020, right, when the Australia fires were still going. And when I woke up in the dream, I looked around me and I was just I was just in the Australian wilderness on fire. And I look around and I see Hulk Hogan, right? And he's just like, I don't know why. He was just like out in his birthday suit and he was just putting out the fires like it was nothing. I don't know why it was Hulk Hogan. I don't know why he was naked or why I was in Australia. But yeah. So like every time I think of bananas, I think of Hulk Hogan in Australia.
Well, there's a joke that lies in that one too.
The whole thing's a joke.
Yeah.
The dream is the punchline.
I was gonna say, hopefully you didn't see Hulk Hogan's banana. But what are you looking at, brother?
Freedom isn't free.
Yes. I ran out of water, but I'll still put it out. Like, oh my god. Now I'm gonna have to think about Hulk Hogan and putting out fires. Jesus. Well, actually, I was think about like I'm often talking about I write articles about the importance of fathers and things like that, and wanting to protect their kids. And I'm trying to think from your father's perspective of that's why it's important when we say like people need to be informed, but they have to have like informed consent before they move forward. But when you're getting misinformation or getting told lies, then how are you truly informed about what's going on?
Yeah.
And I could just imagine like your father sounds like a typical father who wants to protect their child and is doing stuff based off of what the medical professionals are telling him to do. And like I've talked about this for myself a few times, and I'm trying to talk about it more so it's like less of a thing for me. But when I was 6 years old, I apparently told my mom, I sort of remember telling her, but I told my mom that I wanted to die. I wanted to kill myself.
6 years old.
Yeah. And
What was making you feel that way?
man, we were, first off, my father wasn't there. So that's one thing. We were moving around a lot. In like 2 years, we moved from Michigan to Virginia to New York. I had a bad experience living with one of my family members, so much so that my sister remembers. She would scare me, and I would pee myself because like she would yell at me about something, right? And I just remember her being mean. So I think like all these different things were happening. We left that house and we became homeless for a bit, and then I think we finally got situated in an apartment, and I think that's when it happened. And I told her that I want to get underneath my bed and my bed to fall on top of me as the way for me to kill myself. Like this very 6-year-old way of thinking.
But that's really rough.
Yeah. But what happened was, understand my mother's a nurse. And so she listens to what the professionals are saying. What are the medical professionals saying? So one day we go for this drive and we in some building and she hands me off to some people. She brought me to a mental institute. And I didn't know where I was. I didn't know what was going on. I'm 6 years old. And now I'm locked away in this place and I can't go anywhere. And long story short, I was there for 3 months. But was I really suicidal? Like no one like talked to me, right? Like it's not like I said that and then I went and did some therapy or something like that. That was what she was told to do, right? The expert said you need to bring your child immediately to this place.
And when it comes to like the idea of your child dying or committing suicide,
yeah,
what won't you do?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you listen to the experts?
Exactly. So I'm not even mad at my mother, right? Because it's not like she did nothing. She did something. She went to someone who's supposed to be a professional and they said, this is what you should do. But I know, because I remember that time, I know that I wasn't really, like I was a depressed kid because of everything that was going on. Like no fucking why I wanted to die. Like like nothing is stable in my life. We're moving constantly.
Yeah.
My father's not there. You know, like all this chaos is going on. So yeah, I think I want to die because this sucks. This
Right.
really sucks.
Being suicidal
Is a response.
it almost never means that you actually want to die. It usually means that you just want a better life. You want some stability.
Exactly. But that having me go to a facility like that really was like a mark in my life that taught me a lot of things. It taught me like sharing your feelings can get you locked up, which is why throughout my life I'm very quiet. I'm very reserved until I feel comfortable. So I'm listening. I'm being aware.
This feels very similar to my own experience, actually.
Yeah.
Like going to therapy a bunch and like not ever getting better and undergoing all these treatments taught me that by talking about your feelings, it does nothing. So there is no point in doing so. There's no point in confiding in the people around you, which was kind of already the attitude that I had from a very young age. I kind of had like I guess you'd say like a boys don't cry attitude, where I would never really try to cry in front of people or talk about my feelings with anybody because I just couldn't trust that it would get better.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you don't, especially when you're a child, you don't have the life experience to understand like the nuance behind what's going on in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And
oftentimes you don't have like the verbal skills or understanding of your own emotions or your situation.
Yeah.
to verbalize that,
Yeah. Like
to communicate that.
just like me, I don't know any other way to say this. Like I'm 6. I can't like my verbalization skills even now. I can't even pronounce stuff. My skills aren't there to fully express how I feel. Um, and the experts got it wrong. Like I wasn't going to do anything to myself. I was just reacting to my life. So that's what like I usually have a problem with people saying that that as soon as someone is depressed, they need to be put on pills, right? And it's like, well, why are they depressed? Like, because I think that's really important.
Mm.
Are you depressed because a loved one died? Like, that's very understandable why you're depressed. Let's talk about it. Let's address these things. Maybe you're just mourning. Are you depressed because you have a shit job? Okay. And you're struggling financially? Okay, well, if we change that, that would change your depression levels. So maybe it's not some permanent state that is so detrimental. Maybe it's just, I don't know, you reacting to how your life is currently going.
Mm.
So how can we improve your life that will get rid of the depression? But the way that we kind of talk about it is that it is always a chemical imbalance, right? So we have, oh, you're depressed? No, you should always be happy. So take this pill, you know, rather than it being probably a temporary state of being.
Right.
And yes, there are people who are chronically depressed.
Mm.
Not everybody's the same. But I think there's something there when we see so many people who are being medicated and they're being medicated for a long time. They're not getting better. They're probably even more neurotic than they were before, right? And now they're hooked on these drugs. And now that, they have to come off it at some point. But are they getting better? Who knows?
Yeah, it's a huge issue in pretty much every area of healthcare at this point, where everything's being over medicated.
Yeah.
What comes to mind like is birth control. I can't count how many of my friends right now have started on birth control, many of them in high school, and they handed out like candy to girls for normal issues like painful periods or like not wanting to have a period, so you can just like take the pills continuously and not have to deal with it.
Right.
How does that affect the body? Oftentimes I've seen them not get any healthier.
Yeah.
I actually went on birth control for a little bit. I've never really addressed that before, but after like about a year after I detransitioned, I was like, like I'm still having like some issues with my period. I mean, they were miraculously they came back. My periods came back about like 2 months after I stopped taking the hormones, and they were fairly regular. They're getting more and more regular. It's to the point that like I was very familiar with each stage of my cycle, and I could kind of determine where I was at just by the symptoms alone. I was very healthy, but at the same time, towards like the premenstrual phase of my cycle, like I would get very, very emotionally unstable, often to the point that I was having like suicidal ideation. And I think like looking back, I think it was just me and my body still trying to regulate itself hormonally after being on hormones and having my puberty blocked for so long. But I was really worried that like it was just going to be a part of me forever, that it wasn't going to be something that I was going to be able to deal with on my own. So I kind of jumped the gun and started taking birth control. Actually felt worse while I was on it. It sucked to be on. I went off of it like within less than a year. That screwed up my cycles. Like I've been off of it for about a year and maybe a month now. They're still irregular. Like all this progress that I made with that, it's gone. Like I don't think it was entirely the birth control either. Like there's so many unknowns with detransitioners in our health and how like medications and other things will affect us after having been on these treatments for such amount of time.
Right.
So it's frustrating. It's kind of exemplary of an even bigger issue with healthcare for detransitioners right now, with how many unknowns there are. We have no idea what our lives are going to look like from here on. Doctors don't even want to address that.
Yeah.
Like, as soon as we announce we detransition, we try to go back to our doctors who helped us through the transition in the first place. They don't want to help. A lot of the time, they don't know how to help.
Yeah.
There's no standards of care for us. There's no codes in the ICD-10 to bill for insurance when dealing with like complications. There isn't even regret is not, and detransition is not acknowledged at all in the healthcare system. It's never brought up as a possibility during consultations, and there's no codes or anything for it. Even though it's a very real possibility, it's a huge, major life decision that you're making, and yet coming out the other side of it is never considered or really brought up.
Yeah.
And I hear this time and time again from other detransitioners. I didn't know what detransitioning was until I did it. And when I tried to go back to my doctors for all these issues that I had, and for psychological support, because I was so traumatized from going through it and coming out of it, and I was distraught. I was grieving my breast. I was grieving what my life could have been if I was just allowed to grow. And with every single issue that I had to figure it out all on my own.
Wow.
I've got these complications still, from the testosterone and from the surgery, actually, with the skin grafts that they used, that I've tried to reach out to different doctors to help with, to no avail. They have no idea what's going on with me.
Sorry for my pause, because I'm just thinking like that you guys are basically just left out there to fend for yourselves.
Oh yeah.
You know, everybody has their hands out and wants to take that money, you know, when you want to go through the process, but no one wants to be accountable for what might happen afterwards. You know, that's why I think lawsuits lawsuits are the way forward for stuff like this. Because then sometimes you have to compel people to double check. Because I used to hear, obviously, I don't know this, but you hear stuff. I thought like years ago, anything for someone who wanted to transition, so to speak, or have some sort of like they used to call it sex reassignment, stuff like that.
I try to avoid phrases like that because you're not actually reassigning anything.
Yeah.
Sex can't be changed.
But I guess that's what they used to call it a long time ago. But they would say like before you do anything, you have to go to a therapist for X amount of time to make sure that you are fully prepared for what is about to happen.
Oh, they used to do that.
They used to do that.
They used to decades ago.
Decades ago, right? That's what I'm saying. Like this is the old way of thinking, and to me that sounds like the liability insurance right there. Like, listen, we made them fully aware as to what's going to happen. We have plenty of consultations. They sought therapy. They fought for it. They really wanted to do this. So then we did it, right? But now if everybody's just streamlining this, like there's not really a full check. The law is saying you must affirm for all institutions. So no one's really questioning you whatsoever. But yet there are clearly people who have either regret or complications or both, you know, and you guys are...
Complications, especially with these surgeries, and the genital surgeries, are very common.
Yeah.
It's just not natural for the body. You can't just suppress a natural bodily process, such as puberty, without expecting there to be some sort of consequence. And there absolutely are.
Yeah.
And the human body is not meant to sustain cross-sex hormones in huge doses for extended periods of time. especially not over years or decades.
Right. So let me ask you. Um, I know you said you came across it on the internet. What was the particular forum that you were finding this information? Was it Pinterest or Reddit or not Pinterest? Is it Pinterest one of them? Or I think I'm mixing up platforms.
I wouldn't be surprised because Pinterest is like very, very image oriented.
Yeah.
For me, it was, I actually, it's something that like, that I learned about a little bit earlier than I remembered it being.
Hmm.
Like, I think I was like watching YouTube videos on transitioning probably like as young as like 10 or 11.
Mm.
But with Instagram, it was different because like now like it's always in your face, like it's always like being just like the way that the algorithm on there works. It's always going to show you stuff that you show interest in or that you viewed or interacted with before. So like I was seeing more and more of it, and I learned about it through, or I didn't learn about it, but I discovered like the online trans community through communities that were like around my own personal interests. So like illustration, anime, manga, video games that I liked.
Hmm.
Um, there are a lot of users in those communities who are identified as like part of the LGBT, many of whom were like trans or non-binary, and they often use like LGBT hashtags in their posts. So I would see more and more LGBT posts,
Right.
and so it was something that I found that I was greatly interested in because of these commonalities with my interests and also like some of my personality traits with these people. Many of them were very creative. They were funny. They were relatable, and just all these ideas like around. I was like about like 12, 13. So as an age, so where naturally I was trying to kind of like expand my role in the world, figure out my identity, um, and there's all these new ideas around like sexuality and gender and the way that you present yourself,
Hmm.
and it was just so it was so new to me, and all these different ideas, like you can be born as one sex, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you are that for life. I started to like do to really pay attention to these communities and especially these people's like personal stories
Hmm.
of them. Many of them had it rough at home or at school. They didn't really feel like they had anywhere to find to call home, to just be themselves. But they would find that within the transgender community, within their friends who would accept them and their identity. And oftentimes, like they would kind of struggle with with that acceptance for a little bit. And I would watch as these people would grow, their families would start to go along with it, and as they went on this journey, and many of them, some of them went on to start going through the medical process, and it was something that I thought it was like a message of hope almost,
Hmm.
and it was that was something that I kind of yearned for, that feeling of hope, that feeling that I could like find myself and be accepted and loved by the people around me. And I mean, in my naive, very likely autistic brain at the time, it was like, well, maybe that's why I'm the way I am. Maybe I have a male brain in a girl's body. Maybe that's why I feel so uncomfortable when it comes to my femininity and the female parts of myself and my development physically. Maybe that's why I've never felt like I fit in really with my sisters or with the girls around me, or wanted to, or really looked forward to the idea of being a woman.
Hmm.
Maybe it's because I was supposed to be a boy all along.
Hmm. Um, man, I'm just thinking about I'm thinking about all the stuff that you were experiencing and all these different people who were within your community. Or I say your community, but at the time, what they're going through. That's something that because I talk a lot about childhood trauma,
Mhm.
and I think one way to really know who somebody is to understand their childhood, because adults are just grown children. That's basically all we are.
Yeah.
And the patterns and the behaviors and the things that we learn as kids, we just repeat it in an adult
Sticks
form.
with you for life.
It sits with you for life. So, especially if something traumatic happens to you as a child, you basically have the rest of your adult life battling that habitual situation or that tremendous amount of fear that you had because this happened to you, or oh, or the learned behavior that you picked up from, your abusive father or,
Yeah.
whoever you were around. And I look at a lot of these people who are transitioning, and I understand where they're coming from.
Hmm.
I think there are a lot of people who just want to point their fingers and call them weird or this and that, or just,
Sure, some of them are, but a lot
some
of
of
them
them
are
are
genuinely
confused.
misunderstood people
They're confused,
who need
misunderstood. Yeah,
someplace to. They need an identity. They need that foundation in their lives. They need a community around them,
right.
and many of them are on the spectrum. Many of them are neurodivergent. Many of them have been traumatized, especially when it comes to their family or having been sexually assaulted.
Hmm.
And it's not hard to see how that might affect the way that they see their bodies, or especially like their sexuality or their sexual organs.
Yeah,
If if that part of them has been compromised, or if they didn't have like a good male or female role model growing up.
yeah. No, you're exactly right. Like, I actually talked about it earlier with Colin Wright. Um, Someone that works with me with Wrong Speak. Her name is Audra Fasanelli, and I'm not talking out of turn because she's talked about this publicly, but um, she was groomed by a pedophile,
Mm.
um, and she was uncomfortable with her body afterwards, right? And she's talked about feeling dysphoric, and it took a while for her mom to kind of make her feel comfortable about her body again. Um, and she said, thank God transitioning for teenagers didn't exist because I would have been right there on that list because of what happened to her. And and this man who's not really a man is a absolute pervert, um, forcing her to do something at such a young age, and she's not mentally ready for it or comfortable, right? So I think I think there are a lot of young girls, even young boys, who've been through something similar, and no one's recognizing that. I think I'm actually this is going to be like the theme of my next book. Whenever I get a chance to finish writing it, I think that much of the issues that we are seeing, whether it's crime, transitioning, all these different things, I think the root of it comes from childhood trauma
Yep.
for a lot of young people.
Lots of broken families out there.
Lots of broken
And the
families.
family is
Yeah,
the basic unit upholding our society.
that's exactly it. And when that crumbles, everything else falls with it. So then what ends up happening is we see the after effects, right? So we see the guy who's breaking into your car or breaking into your house and stealing stuff, but we don't see that that kid was tossed away at a very young age, went into foster homes, went back and forth, in the process was molested, and then so on and so forth, has no skills, goes in and out of jail, and now here he is breaking into your car, right? So it's no one's born into this, right? They are they are reacting to their environment. Some of them are being raised into this,
Yes.
and we cannot be shocked when the family structure falls apart and we see broken people at the end of the day. And one of the things that I'm very fortunate is that I didn't really become a statistic in that way.
Mhm.
You know,
What do you feel like it was that kept you out of that?
we moved. My mother moved us away from Detroit. I was born in Detroit,
Mm.
and especially back in the '80s, wasn't the best of places. And I think about that often. Like, what if we didn't move? So we had moved and went to Virginia. We were in rural, suburban areas and stuff like that,
Mhm.
and that kind of kept us away from. I mean, obviously, you could find trouble anywhere,
Yeah.
but that's a lot of stuff. I was like, man,
I hope you don't mind. That's just like a tick I have.
it's all good. No, I think about all the different places that we went to, and it was you can find trouble anywhere, but it was
Mhm.
harder to find trouble in these areas, the places that I was living at. Also, I've always been like very like analytical, so I've always been like, does that make sense? I've just questioning things,
Mhm.
um, and that has helped me a lot. Uh, like when it came to drugs, actually, funny enough, in high school, because I always felt like the outcast. Um, my friends were the outcasts.
Mm.
So they were the skater goth kids. They were the you know weed heads and stuff like that, and they all at least smoked weed. Maybe they drink, but I never did it, and they respected that too. So they would do it after I would leave, or if they happened to do it while I was there, they understood that I wasn't going to stay, right? They never tried, Adam, you sure you don't? Like, they didn't do any of that. They just understood and they respected that.
Mhm.
But I look at their situations, many of them had fucked up home lives.
Right.
Like my one good friend, he went into rehab at 16 for alcohol. He had an abusive father, right? He struggled with that. And he actually died of an overdose some years ago. And he was in mid 30s when he passed away.
Sorry to hear about that.
Yeah. Um, and that's the thing, he's self-medicating, and he's trying to deal with this stuff that happened to him as a child. And he was a great guy, really great guy. He has a really good heart, but he was just struggling with it. And I just see so much pain that gets brought on, and people think that pain is their personality, and they're just lost. They're just trying to figure things out. And yeah, sometimes people break the law and they should be punished for it, but I don't know. There's a long, long road before they make it there, and no one stops and no one helps them. And that's why I think like this whole thing with the medical transitioning, you had a long road to even make it to certain points, and so many professionals and experts and all this other stuff.
Yeah,
And
they
they,
say like, oh, like we have these multidisciplinary teams of all sorts of different doctors, but it's all leading to the same pipeline.
yeah, it's a facade at that point,
Yep.
right? It's not a hurdle. It's like you said, it's literally a pipeline. We're just sending you to the ultimate destination, and allowing you to experience trauma, allowing you to go through this entire
To go
situation.
further and further into it.
Yeah,
And it absolutely was traumatizing, the transition itself, or at least facilitating more trauma to happen.
yeah,
It was incredible watching my body change at the rate that it did, but it was like I was becoming more and more dissociated from myself, from my body, from my sex, and eventually everything around me, the people around me.
hmm
I would You know, I was wearing this binder so I could cover up this part of my body that I had trauma around.
Right.
But every day after school, I would take it back off. Those breasts were still there, and I would look at myself in the mirror, see all these masculine or masculinizing features, but I still had, you know, fairly feminine hips. I still had breasts and female genitalia,
Mm-hmm.
and it just it was so disorienting just to look at that even subconsciously just knowing that I was chasing something that was nothing more than a dream, and that no matter what I would do to myself, excuse me,
That's it. That's it.
it would never actually make me into a guy. And the testosterone was making it harder for me to process what I was going through emotionally. Um, I found it very difficult to cry, and crying itself, I would never really get a release out of it. I could do it for hours, and I just feel so much worse.
Mm.
Like nothing would come out of it, and um, it was just like so these feelings just like snowballed over time, right? Because I can't process it naturally, and I also didn't really feel like I was in a position where I could confide to anybody about these feelings. So they would come out in ways that were very unhealthy and start to affect my relationships, and eventually like my school performance and pretty much every area of my life, right?
Mm.
Forgot what I was going with that.
It's all good. No, but I think ultimately your point is no one was there to understand how distraught
Oh yeah,
you felt.
yeah. And I was getting absolutely no support from the doctors at all through this. Almost all of them were females, so I didn't know what being a guy or like having these feelings or growing up like that under the influence of testosterone and in an environment where you're expected to adhere to male social norms is like. I didn't really have any guidance around that.
Mm.
And one of the most stressful parts about that was my sex drive. And you know, since I'm on a large dose of male sex hormones, that's obviously going to skyrocket, you know? Um, like I said earlier, it's just a sudden boost in that one day. It's not like a natural male puberty. And so with that being said, and with the lack of proper like male guidance around that thing, a woman, and especially a young neurodivergent girl,
Mm-hmm.
is not going to understand how to deal with that. And it was a huge problem for me. I'd even say that I became hypersexual during that point in time.
Mm.
Um, I wasn't actually getting into any physical, intimate relationships, luckily at the time. Um, but there were a lot of like online relationships that I had and a lot of like interactions that I was having that I should not have.
Mm.
But after like the validation of transitioning and changing went away, I kind of started seeking that validation and that comfort, that purpose in other avenues. And with these feelings that I didn't know how to deal with, um, you know, like women are supposed to be the gatekeepers of things like sex and intimacy and relationships. But if you take away that female hormonal profile and put a woman on a massive dose of androgen instead, that those instincts are going to be wiped away.
Right.
And she's not going to be discriminate anymore in her choices with which men she chooses to mingle with or what she gives out.
Would you say that there were a lot of predatory people who understood this and took advantage of it?
Um, yeah, so it was a lot of these men who I was interacting with. They were adults. I really wanted to date somebody my age and to have like a healthy relationship like that. Um, but I didn't feel like I could because of my transition. It was actively limiting my dating pool because I was still female.
Hmm.
I outwardly looked like a boy, but I was still female, and I was still attracted to males in spite of that. So there were a lot of girls who had feelings for me, but I didn't really reciprocate attraction, and I also didn't really. I used to consider myself bisexual. I used to experience attraction towards girls, but it was mostly sexual in nature, and I didn't really want to like end up breaking a girl's heart after finding out like I'm not like I don't really have like any emotional interest in her, or
Hmm.
like being disappointing because I'm not actually a guy. I'm not what she's actually looking for. But a lot of the boys my age and at school who the few of them who did reciprocate attraction to me or like have any attraction to me were not people who I would want to be in a relationship with.
Right.
Many of them were um, in a bad situation at home. Many of them were engaging in things like drugs. So I didn't really have any interest. But there were a lot of older boys at school who, like, for example, like seniors who were interested in me when I was like barely a freshman in high school. Some of them were like had like just graduated who showed interest in me. So it was like basically like somebody fresh out of middle school and someone who's about to become an adult.
Right.
Um, so and online, I was getting a lot of it. I would get a lot of sexual attention from older men. Some of them were well, not necessarily like older men, like just men who were adults and older than me. Um,
So
but
like
they,
someone maybe in their 20s or something
yeah,
like
yeah,
that. Okay.
like I'd say the age range was like maybe like 18 to maybe like their 30s, but mainly
Wow.
like in that 18, 20-ish age range. Um, both within like the trans community and outside of it, um, who would befriend me and elicit and engage in these illicit conversations
Hmm.
and stuff of that nature with me.
Hmm.
So it was a very unhealthy point in my life, and I knew that it wasn't good and that these people didn't actually love me, but I didn't think that I was somebody who was deserving of love, and I didn't really feel like I had a purpose. So in a way, it kind of, in some messed up sense, it kind of gave me that purpose to somebody else, but it was destroying me. I was I was really taking away a part of myself and
Yeah.
giving it to people who didn't deserve it.
That's uh, the feeling of not deserving love, and I'm trying to think of like a better example, but the quickest example I can think of is someone who might become a prostitute
Mm.
or someone who might uh, engage in porn, let's just say,
That was
where
something that I legitimately thought about which was messed up because this was all before I was 18. But it was just so a big part of this. I grew up in a very hypersexualized culture, so stuff like that was very normalized amongst girls and people my age.
right,
Like it was something normal.
yeah, and there's no guardrails. Everybody's just accept, accept,
Yep.
accept, and what everybody
And
wants to do.
experimentation is good and encouraged.
Exactly.
And focus on the pleasure rather than the purpose. Right.
Yeah. Yep.
That's the kind of
Exactly.
environment I grew up in. Not
And
like in my family, but like amongst my peer group
right.
and what I was like seeing on social media.
And then you have these adults who know better, right? And take advantage of you being confused, whether they were in the trans community or not. Um, and that's unfortunate. And they can see, like, one thing I can tell you is this. As a guy, I can tell a girl who's insecure. There are signs,
Yep.
right? Um, and so it's not a big, it's not a surprise.
Yeah.
95% of the time. The longer you interact with someone, the more you kind of figure out how secure they are with themselves. And the biggest clue is someone who's willing to give away sex to anybody,
Yep.
right? Because that's her only way of validation. Sex is her commodity. So she just gives it away. That's how she gains attention. This is how she gains validation.
It gives her a sense of purpose.
It gives her a sense of purpose. And she doesn't get attached or doesn't want to get attached because she doesn't feel that she's deserving of love. Although she's in many ways chasing it, but she doesn't think she deserves it. It's very confusing. But these are signs of insecurity. So I'm just thinking these men who, and I use that loosely, but these men see a girl who is confused and they're taking advantage of your confusion. They're taking advantage of your insecurity about yourself. They're the predators in our society. And if they're doing that with you, how many other girls are they doing that with?
Who knows? They're opportunists.
They're opportunists.
And whether it's 1 or 10 or hundreds of girls.
Yeah. And they're from a predator standpoint. That's what I try to tell people. Like, predators go where the prey are, right?
Yep.
It's not a shock if you find out some teacher's a complete pervert and pedophile. Yeah. Like, shouldn't shock you at all. Shouldn't shock you that there are Boy Scout, Girl Scout coaches, or Boy Scout, Girl Scout leaders,
or that they show up in these communities around gender and sexuality.
Yes, or even more so, I find it very suspect as a parent when I see someone, especially when they don't have kids, but it's still suspect when they do, but when they don't have children and they're like, these children need to go through these things. We should show them this sexual thing. And I'm just like, why are you saying these things? Because it seems very suspect as to why you're advocating for kids to see porn or for kids to masturbate. You know, like that seems very unusual. And why are you always talking about this? Like, that's what I'm like, I get
it's very incriminating.
Vibes. Yes.
Like no normal human being is constantly thinking about combining sex and children's minds.
Right. Right. The way they talk about like even if it's questionable, right? You can understand a parent like, I'm not sure about this. Err on the side of caution, right? Let's not have it in there. But they act like if we don't have it in there, then kids won't understand what sex is. And I'm like, well, we had sex ed as a very like bland, this is how it works, right? But we didn't have like, hey, here's a porno, we're about to put it on, we're gonna demonstrate here. Like we didn't. There was a barrier. It was very educational and bland, and it wasn't like permanent. You know.
I feel like it's that sort of blandness though that makes it easier for movements like that to infiltrate into it though, because like sure you might be teaching about like, I mean in my case like my sex ed, like the most comprehensive it got was like, don't have sex. Just don't do it. Never talking about like what happens if you do it. If you do get pregnant, if you do end up getting a disease from it, just like showing us pictures of like a woman giving birth or like genitalia that's infected with diseases, but like they never talk about it from a cultural perspective, telling kids why it's important to wait and to have some discernment, to wait until you're preferably at least married or in a long-term relationship, to do it with somebody that you trust. Why that's important.
Well, see but this is the problem. I hear what you're saying, that they didn't talk about that, but I don't think they're supposed to.
I think ultimately that should be up to the parents. Yes, but a lot of parents are afraid to address that.
And that's unfortunate. That's the unfortunate like effect of it, is that no one's talking to you about like in an in-depth way, so you don't really get to understand it and the parents are supposed to instruct. I say this as a parent who is an 18-year-old now. It's uncomfortable to talk about these things
Yeah.
from a parental standpoint.
Yes, and in the world that we live in now, it is compared, like especially compared to just like a few decades ago, we're very comfortable.
Yeah,
We have more luxury than kings of like a even just a century ago ever will have had in their lives. And because of that, we've gotten so used to the comfortable that we're afraid to face the uncomfortable because we don't really have to deal with it.
yeah,
And now like we got this epidemic of parents who don't really address these uncomfortable issues or have these uncomfortable discussions with their children.
yeah,
They don't want to face that. But ultimately you have to because your child is going to learn about these things.
yeah,
And it's best that it doesn't come from an outside influence that can pervert their perspective on these things. They rely on you for stability, for understanding of the world.
right. And that's exactly it. Like, as much as we talked about the institutions and the therapists and the doctors and the educators, well, there is a parental breakdown as well. There are a lot of parents who aren't fulfilling their part, right? And letting these kids fall through the cracks. Even if they're there, they're not educating them. Like, they have the knowledge, so it's not ignorance. They're not having that conversation. They're not guiding them. And I think what ends up happening is a lot of parents are saying, well, listen, let them do it, right? So the culture, why didn't they talk about it from a cultural standpoint? Or why didn't anybody talk to me about, okay, fine, you want to have a boyfriend, you want to have a girlfriend, here's how you know a healthy relationship, right? Why didn't they talk about that? Otherwise, I wouldn't experience X, Y, and Z.
And what to look for in a partner.
What to look for, right? Well, let the teachers teach that, right? But what if the teacher is a complete pervert? What if the teacher is an ideologue and is telling you bad information? Or what if the teacher says anything that your parents tell you about this, they're actually ignorant and they're wrong, right? That's the problem that I'm seeing, is that the educators, whether it be the teacher themselves or the administrators or whoever, and in many cases the administrators say you have to teach this, and then the teacher, well, it's my job to teach, and they're telling me I have to do this. So, but we're seeing them being forced into a position to fill in the role of the parents.
Yeah.
And the parents are just saying, well, go ahead and do it.
Yeah, and if you just let your hand off the wheel like that entirely, inevitably there is going to be some bad influence in some
Someone's
way.
going to take control of that wheel.
Yep.
And then what ends up happening is 2020 is the weirdest year ever, where like a whole bunch of bad things happen, a whole bunch of good things happen, and it's very extreme. But like, parents got to see what they were learning in school, and they got to see what kind of driving style these people have when their hand is on the wheel. And then they're like, oh shit, I shouldn't have just stayed clear and said, hey, the school's got it, we're good. I'm going to keep doing my working and taking care of this other stuff. The school's taking care of our kids. And they didn't realize everything that happened, you know?
So
now,
they see the curriculum at home, you mean?
Yeah.
I never really thought about it that way. That makes sense.
Yeah. 2020 was a big wake-up call. So it wasn't just like these people just showed up at school board meetings just because, they felt like it. It was because parents were legit seeing what was going on, and then people were reporting on it, and then the parents who weren't aware of it were now starting to be like, I didn't see anything on my kids just yet. Let me do a Freedom of Information Act and see what's going on. Let me talk to these other parents. Oh, Cindy saw something and her kids. Oh, I missed that. And then they go and look. All these parents became very aware as to what was going on. Then they started reacting to it. So that entire thing was a reaction to what was already happening, right? It had been happening. So if I think of it like this, if the pandemic didn't happen, would we be sitting here having these conversations? Like,
Probably not.
probably not. That's the weird fucking thing about 2020. It's like it's really terrible in many ways, but it was actually really good in other ways as well, because we may have stopped something that was a slow drip into a direction, and it because it's gradual, people don't notice it, and we pumped the brakes and said, "Oh, something's going on here,"
Yep.
and now here we are.
It's really a blessing in disguise, isn't it?
Yeah, very much so. It's a blessing in disguise. Oh man, 2020 is. But I say there are people who were born out of 2020. You know, I think you might be born out of 2020, so to speak, as far as finding another purpose and doing something that you weren't doing before because there's something very important that you have to do.
Yep.
So I say that I'm born out of 2020 because I started writing my book out in 2020. You know, founders of Moms for Liberty, I've talked to them reacting from 2020, everything that was happening there.
And
So many people.
Yeah, I mean, that year I hadn't yet detransitioned, but it was a year before that happened. But like all the changes with the pandemic hitting, and with the social distance and distance learning measures and being so isolated like that, and then my surgery happening during that same year, that was what took me out of it, and it was basically a rebirth for me.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why I actually call it the 2020 rebirth. But
I like that.
Yeah. I know we're nearing the end, but I wanted to.
How much time has elapsed?
Oh, that's a good question. How much time? Almost an hour and 20.
Really, it's felt like 30 minutes. That went by so quick.
There you go. Because it's casual. No, I usually like to ask, are you optimistic about the future?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I think things just in general are going to get worse, and a lot worse, before they inevitably get better and people start waking up and people start feeling like they have a purpose that they have to fight.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing that with this issue in particular. A lot of people are waking up to the reality of what is going on, and the fact that this is spread to, this whole gender thing has spread to every community in America in some way, and people are fighting back. People are taking hold of their families, of their children, of their communities. They're fighting for them, and that's something. It's just been so incredibly beautiful for me to see that, to be a part of it, and also like meeting the other men, women, and kids who've been affected by this, the families, the detransitioners, having that camaraderie with them, and growing through those friendships, but also like meeting other people who've been affected by this, who are struggling within their own families right now, but they're fighting.
Yeah.
And they have hope, and they have love, and it's something that's just really reaffirmed my love for humanity. And I think good will win in the very end.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm I didn't ask you, but are you Christian?
Yes.
Okay. I saw the crosses, but I just wanted to ask, make sure.
I've had this necklace since before I consider myself a Christian.
Okay.
And now it has a new meaning.
Yeah. Sometimes people have it, you know. And,
sometimes it's just like an aesthetic thing.
Yeah.
And it was for me before.
Okay.
But.
And that's for me, and I've had my own. You know, I was agnostic for a period of time, and becoming someone who is a believer, and I plan on getting baptized pretty soon. Actually, I was never baptized as a child, which will mean a lot to me. But
I am too. At some point, I'm planning on getting baptized too. At some point, I haven't done that yet.
Oh, well, there you go.
But I also grew up pretty much agnostic.
Yeah. I think for me, it was with me having faith. It's not just having faith in Christ, but it's having faith in Christ and having faith that good will win at the end, right? and that
And to spread that good and to encourage other people to do so.
exactly, um, and that within failure, within the bad, within a terrible moment, people can be reborn, opportunities can be reborn.
And there's a
So
purpose in it all.
there's a purpose in it all. That's why I say the 2020 rebirth, because so many people became something greater than they ever thought they could. You know, that's exactly how I felt, and I felt called to do something because I had a pretty comfortable life, had a profession, nothing was wrong. I wasn't getting canceled. Like some people were getting canceled and stuff like that.
Oh,
I
yeah.
wasn't, but I just felt like I need to say something. And I tell people this all the time. I don't have a background in writing, but I wasn't the only one writing my book. Like I felt compelled to do something. I felt like I needed to actually do this. And so it's things like that. I feel like evil's not going to win.
Yeah.
Right? There are going to be a lot of charlatans. There are going to be a lot of people who are, say that we're here, we're on your side, we're here to help, and you find out that what they really are and what their motives are,
Yep.
and that's going to happen. But I think if you trust your instincts, you'll see like, no, this person is a real person
Yep.
who's trying to fight for something good. And as long as you're comfortable in this fight, then you're good.
Yep. And
Yeah.
and having a biblical foundation for your beliefs, it gives you it gives you that stability, but it also gives you that understanding of what it means to be a good person.
Yeah.
And to see those qualities in other people and understand who to watch out for or who to work with.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things when you have depression and stuff like that, you have a lot of self-doubt, and so you stop listening to yourself.
Yes.
You stop listening to that voice.
But
right?
if you can't trust yourself, how do you trust other people?
That's a big thing. But when you start to listen to that voice, I've talked about me solo traveling, and solo traveling really helped to get rid of that social anxiety that I had, where I was just like unsure and questioning myself. And going to a foreign place where you don't know anybody, you don't know the language, you don't know, everything is foreign to you, it's different. So now you have to listen to yourself. And every time you listen to yourself, you're right. Right? So if you go somewhere and you're like, I'm going to go down this street, I just feel like I should go down this street. And you went down that street and you find this beautiful restaurant, you have the best food. And I was like, I am so glad I listened to myself. Or you're around someone and you're like, I'm not feeling this person. And you stayed away from that person.
Yep.
Right? So you start listening to yourself. And I started employing that in my life. And I realized it's not just a voice in me. Like, this is something that God instilled in all of us. It's just a matter of, are we listening to ourselves? And I felt like throughout my life, there was something that was blocking me from God.
Yep.
Right? And I think that's something that probably happened with you. You're not trusting yourself. You're not even comfortable with yourself. Like, something is telling you that the natural you is not really you, right?
Yeah.
And the way that God made you is actually wrong.
Yes.
Right? And there's something, people throw us around satanic about it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It is absolutely satanic teaching that anybody, especially children, can be born wrong, even if they're perfectly healthy, and that they have to be, in order to be okay emotionally as people, they have to change themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. So from that very moment that they convince you not to listen to who you are and what you are, then they have you.
Yep.
Right? And so that you just move about your life always questioning yourself.
Yeah. And because I didn't have that biblical foundation, I didn't really go to church growing up. After a pretty young age, my mom and dad just stopped bringing me to church. And they thought that I would probably just end up like developing a worldview of my own.
Mm-hmm.
But because of that, like I didn't have that structure that I needed in terms of like my values, my convictions. And so I was always struggling to find something to believe in to give me a purpose. And transition became that. But of
Yeah.
course it was taking away from my real identity, from my health, from who I was as a person. And I started to believe that I didn't have a purpose.
Yeah.
And I mean, now, like looking back, like in spite of like all the struggles that I was going through, I was still being guided by what I feel now to be the Holy Spirit in
Yeah.
those rough times. And I didn't always listen, but as I got out of it, it got so much easier. And I like that you brought up traveling, because that was ultimately what opened me up as a person. Just like putting myself out there, talking about this crazy stuff, um, not being afraid anymore of the repercussions of that.
Yeah.
And also just like through the work that I'm doing, all these experiences, meeting all these new people. You know, when I first started speaking out, it's so funny because like people accuse me of like being like a paid like Republican plant or whatever, right? Like I've been trained. But when I first started, I was a shut-in. I was shy as hell. I spent like all my time just like playing video games and drawing and just like sitting in my room all day doing absolutely nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And doing this has really just opened me up as a person. All the struggles that I've been through it have built my character. And it was through like these travels and connecting with all these different people that I came to Christ.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I tell people to travel, get out there and meet people. And I think traveling also helps with, the extremism and making it seem like everybody's at odds with each other. It's
But
like,
you meet all these people, all these different perspectives, but they're all still civil human beings.
yeah. And we have these different conversations all the time, right? And I think that's why like the online world is like this manufactured world that filled with nihilistic people who who will chastise you for finding something positive going on in the world,
So
right?
those real interactions with people who are just normal, not easily offended, are very much a refresher, aren't they?
Yeah. That's why I say if you're going to be online, you have to have a balance of online and real life.
And also have a thick skin because people say anything.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And don't read all the comments. There's no point in
I
reading
do that sometimes, and it's like usually like the insults and stuff don't get to me anymore, but it's like it's more so just like what pains me the most is that people being like willfully stupid or ignorant.
Yeah,
Like people just putting all their energy into hatred or
yeah.
just not really caring for the truth.
Well, understand it's less about you
Yeah.
and it's more about what you represent.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
It's like it's not something that I take personal offense to, but it's just I hurt for those people.
Yeah. Yeah, because ultimately they're going through something. Like I know we're being like abstract, but that type of person that me and you are thinking about likely is going through something. These aren't
Oh, yeah.
happy people.
Always. Always.
They're not happy at all. Because I know happy people, and they don't do stuff like this.
They don't obsess like that over.
Right. They don't obsess. That's why like there are people who have like just obsessive behavior, and they're the ones who love canceling people, right? Because they have nothing else going on, and
Yep.
great. I have a purpose now, right? And I'm going to find out who your father is. I'm going to find out who your mother is, where they work, where you live. I'm going to do all this stuff, and then they're going to brag about it. It just consumes them. But people who are doing something positive in their life, they don't do anything like this. They don't care, right? Even if they're upset, they don't give a shit enough to do anything close to that. So that's why I know like people who do stuff like this
Yep.
have no purpose,
Yes.
are miserable.
It all comes back to fulfillment and purpose.
Yes, that's what it always comes down to. And I know what my purpose is. I think you're younger than I am, and you are finding out what your purpose is. And I think our purposes are somewhat align. My purpose is to serve, is to help as many people as I possibly can, and serve in some particular fashion. So
Yes.
like me doing this is to encourage conversations with people in a civil way, you know, and I think that is a service because we need more of it. And not everything is highly detrimental, and you're a human being,
Yes.
you know, just like as I am. And I might sit across from somebody who I might not ideologically agree with on everything, but I'm sure we can find things that we can agree on
Yeah.
and have a conversation. And so I think service is a hell of a purpose to follow. And you are serving as well.
Yeah.
You're helping people with your pain and your trauma. I'm helping people with my pain and my trauma, talking about it, so they know that they're not alone.
Yep.
Right. And you talked about when you were transitioning or when you were detransitioning, you felt like, am I the only one that's going through this?
Yeah.
Right. And it's good to know that there are that other people can see you as someone where they're not alone.
Yes.
In what they're going through.
That feeling during the initial phases of loneliness, it's horrific. It's something that I don't think I could describe with words. Just how horrific that point of my life was. That is a feeling that I wish not even on my greatest enemy. Nobody deserves to feel that way. No human being on the earth.
Yeah. Yeah. I've experienced extreme loneliness as well. So I know exactly what you mean. Like that's the killer. Like that's what people are like, you know what? I'm done with this. I'm taking my life. I'm out of here.
And it's that same loneliness that is driving a lot of our issues in our world right now.
Mm-hmm.
Because everybody, in spite of having the internet and all these services and being more interconnected than ever in the history of humanity, we still have all these other issues in our families and our communities that are making us feel more separated than ever.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's superficial. Like we talked about what's natural, what's not natural. It's not natural for 120,000 people who follow me to know everything that I'm doing, right? It's actually not natural. What we're doing right here, this is natural.
Yes.
You know, if I invite some friends over, that's natural.
Mm.
And it's natural in the sense that you can keep tabs on each other, and
Yes.
you can have an emotional response. Like it's far different if I had this conversation with you via Zoom than
Right.
it is sitting here. We had a meal and we were talking. It's different, and we're having people being told it's the same. No, you really do have 10,000 friends on Facebook. Yeah, these are all your friends, and it's like no, it's not the same.
No.
These are just numbers and pixels that we're responding to, you know. So I think we need to have more personal interactions. That's why I tell people go outside, go touch grass, and meet people, talk to people, get on a plane, go somewhere, right? Because we have a whole lot in common as human beings, and we do that's different. It's just the people want to tell you that we're different, right? And it's like no, we're not that different. You know, there's something that we can find within each other. So
Yes.
we're of different ages, we're from different places of the world, we're different sexes, right? And yet we have some commonalities as far as us growing up.
There's always some common ground.
There's always some common ground. Yeah. Well, this is a great conversation.
Yeah.
I hope you enjoyed your sushimi.
Oh yeah, it's pretty good. And I enjoyed this conversation too.
Thank you. Likewise. So thank you again. I'm sure we'll run across each other again.
Oh yeah.